back to Creative Thinkers. My name is Miguel Valenzuela, and we have another fantastic guest today. His name is Richard Pineda. He is chair of the communications department at UTEP. So we want to welcome him to our show. Richard, how are you?
Doing fantastic, Miguel. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely, our pleasure. We're always wanting to learn a little bit about different people in our community. So first, we always start off with you or our guests talking a little bit about who they are, how they grew up, if they're local or not. So give us a little info on that, a little background.
Yeah, absolutely. I am born and raised in El Paso, Texas. I grew up in Sunset Heights neighborhood, so a few
nice
short blocks from where I work now, which is pretty cool. As a matter of fact, I had my grandmother for about 3 years when I came back to UTEP, and so it's kind of cool. I could cruise over to Sunset to have lunch or to watch telenovelas with her in the afternoon. It was very cool. I was originally supposed to go to El Paso High, and my mom got remarried, so I graduated from Eastwood and lived for a couple of years on that side of town before leaving for college. So I was about as nerdy as you can imagine. I was a high school debater. And that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I wanted to parlay that into college debate. So I ended up going to Baylor University, and I debated at Baylor for 4 years. Came back to El Paso. Didn't have a very good plan, but knew that at least I could have someplace to stay in El Paso.
Right.
Stuck with the debate, so that paid for my master's degree in the Department of Communication at UTEP, and then parlayed debate one more time into my PhD. That's how I paid for my graduate experience. So I went to Wayne State in Detroit, Michigan, and did 3 years in California as a faculty member in the Cal State system, and then came back to El Paso about 17 and a half years ago now.
It's been that long.
It has been, yeah. I mean, it's amazing, Miguel, because I think about what the campus transformation has been like at UTEP, and when I did my interview, so I would have been like 18 years ago. I mean, all of those things were things that they were talking about, and it was really, like a lot of people that grew up in El Paso, I thought the first time I'm out of here in college or for college, I'm never coming back. And when I got back from my master's degree, you start to really appreciate El Paso, and you appreciate it for all the things that, as growing up, you don't quite understand. The culture, the people, the sense of pride. And I left again hoping that I might make my way back to El Paso at some point, but never realizing or never thinking that 3 years after my PhD, that I would end up back here, more or less permanently, I think at this point. But
right.
It's one of those things. I mean, El Paso has that magnet. I think when you talk to a lot of people, they'll tell you the same thing, that it draws you back. Most of the time for good reasons, sometimes for a little bit more complicated reasons, but it's really powerful.
That's exactly right. And I think that part of that has to do with family. That's at least my point of view. That's the one thing that brought me back was family. And here I sit. I wanted to go back a little bit in your life. Growing up, did you have any individuals maybe in middle school, high school, around that time who influenced your creativity in any way?
Well, it's interesting. There's a couple of people. One of the funny things, growing up in Sunset Heights, I discovered the university when I was really little. I think my grandmother always kind of wanted me out of the house. So at about 11 years old, I walked up to campus, and what is now the library, but at that point was the brand new UTEP library. I remember going in there for the very first time, and just my mind was totally blown because I loved libraries. I grew up with my mom always taking me to the different branch libraries, but all of a sudden, as this 11-year-old, I walk in and there's 6 stories of this amazing library, and I happened to kind of wander around, get my legs. This is when they used to have the old school card catalogs, right, with the
yes, absolutely.
books. And I took it upon myself to offer my advice this summer to any undergraduate that looked like they were having a hard time using the card catalog. And through this experience, the recently deceased Juan Sandoval saw me one day and came over to me and started asking questions, and we started a friendship that really lasted through the entirety of the time that I've been at UTEP, and until he retired and recently passed away. But the thing that was interesting to me was that he didn't treat me different. I mean, I think he thought it was a novelty that there was this, little nerdy kid that was walking around the library trying to help students. But he would always show me new things that the library was getting. So when they'd install a new piece of art, or when they would set up an exhibition,
really?
if he would see me, he would always say, come here, young man, and would sort of take me to whatever wall they put something up on. I always think about him as one of those kind of gateway figures, because in some ways he could have said, get out of the library, you shouldn't be here.
Absolutely right.
Kid. Right. I mean, literally could have been a gatekeeper, but instead what he did was he acknowledged me, which was, that's kind of badass when you're an 11-year-old to be kind of in that setting. Secondly, he normalized that idea of the university, right? Like he said, this is a place you can be, and this is a place that you can do these things. And I had to a certain extent that drive installed in me very young with my family, but having somebody like that was always really, I think, powerful. And it's really funny, Miguel, because in the time that I came back to the university, whenever we'd run into each other at events, which was pretty frequent, he would immediately sort of tell everybody who was gathered around him, I knew this guy, back when he was 11 or 12 years old. And so it was interesting, because I think somebody like that really can make an environment that can be pretty hostile, quite frankly, right? I mean,
Right.
these are buildings that are different. It's a unique, different space. He could totally have closed off that for me, but instead Juan really opened the doors, and so he sticks out in my mind, I think, as one of the first people to acknowledge and normalize intellectualism, and for me that was powerful, because it set into motion the desire that I had to do things like public speaking and debate, and to be engaged in culture in a way that I might not have. I mean, it's one of those things that somebody shows up in your path and they yank the steering wheel for you, and that results in I think a real tremendous linkage to a place.
I think it absolutely does. Do you think that that's where the spark came for you to become a debater, or maybe into what you do today? Because you do a lot of things, and we'll talk about those in a little while.
Sure.
Go on.
Well, I think Juan was good. I think in terms of intellectualism, I think the fact that he was Mexican American was super helpful for me, because I think at that point in your life you don't necessarily have a vernacular for why race or identity matter, but you certainly can tell this guy looks like me, right? And I think that was important. I was very lucky in that I had a high school debate coach who was a force of nature. She's actually back in El Paso as the principal at Franklin High School now, Sean Mena. But she was somebody who I think really did amazing things with kids who she saw tremendous potential in. But maybe weren't finding the right path, and that's the tricky thing about doing something like speech and debate, is that it really forces you outside of your comfort zone. If you're shy, you can't be. If you're not prepared, it's going to hurt you. And she had a way of really engaging who I was as an individual and doing that. And so, I say this to my students all the time, that I am very lucky in that I had some people that showed up in my life at the right time to be able to tap into those ideas. Because again, as we were saying, and in our conversation earlier this week, that idea of acknowledgement is so significant in anybody's development, but especially for people of color. The idea that somebody, sort of pulls you aside and says, look, your ideas are valid, your perspective is valid, your interpretation is valid. I mean, that's worth its weight in gold. And I was lucky in that sense.
I think that when you talk about somebody as passionately as you do, in the way that you do, I think it kind of expresses the idea of how important this individual was. So you say that these individuals were important through your life and they kind of guided you in some way. Now, the things that you are doing today, do you kind of take back from what you did back in the day and bring that into what you're doing today? And one of the things that you were doing right now, or it's kind of on hiatus right now, and you can explain what we're talking about, but your show, do you bring from the past into the present?
Yes. So I've, for the last several seasons, been the host of KCOS or PBS El Paso's
Yes.
High Q. And I got to tell you, man, this is like, I joke, especially with the students that are the contestants. I describe myself as king of the nerds. And I say that with affection because, for several weeks over the year, we haven't been able to do it because of the pandemic, obviously.
Right.
But for several weeks over the course of the year, I get to interact with these kids who are on a very, very competitive quiz show. And, the funny part, of course, is that you see almost every, I described it to somebody, you have almost every nerd archetype that's in the room. And having been that way, you click, right? I mean, this is like finding your
Right.
people. And, there's funny inside jokes that I think they started to pick up on. And, certainly it involves, one of the things that I thought was interesting when I took over hosting, part of what they wanted to do is to change it a little bit. And
Right.
previous to this point, it was very, had been kind of cut and dry, right? Question, answer, question, answer. So if you go and you look at any of the archive stuff on PBS El Paso, I mean, it is like, I've taken it to a different level of campy. The introductions are hyper serious. I mean, I try to, before each match, I remind myself like what the mascots are for the school. And I come up with these like ridiculous, metaphors about animals fighting and things like that. And the kids love it. And the thing that I think is really the most touching is that several of the schools, as I've been doing this, will now show up in bow ties.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's a real. I mean, for me, that kind of stuff is so. It moves me. I mean, and I when we had to cut that season short because of the pandemic, I wrote a message to them. And I was really sort of tearstruck as I was writing this because for those kids, this is the thing, and we've talked about this too. The idea of being a kid that has creativity and that has energy to be creative sometimes gets turned off for different reasons. Maybe school doesn't channel it, or maybe your parents don't quite understand it. I mean, I think we see that a lot, especially in Raza culture, right? That there's parents may not just understand how to tap into that, right? So they see it as kind of like, I don't know what you're doing. And with these kids, they're so empowered, and this is what's amazing, man. I talk to them a lot of times during the shows and or during breaks, or as we have to cut for taping different things. And one of the groups of kids, I was like, so, where are you going to school? And I'm blown away by those conversations. I mean, one kid's like, well, I got into Brown, but I've been waitlisted at Stanford and I'm waiting to hear on Harvard. And I was like, wow, man, I had fingers crossed that Baylor was going to send me a yes, but these kids are like, they're stacked with 20 different options. I mean, and that's really fulfilling. And I think that they're in on it. I mean, I think they like the hyper camp, and we were able to do the championship game at the Plaza Theater. So we did it for 2 years. Oh, nice. We're on tap to do it again for this last year, but obviously it didn't happen. Stuff like that is cool because on that day, the 2 times that I've been a host for that championship game, the schools brought the bands, the mascots were there, the cheerleaders were there, and a lot of support. Yeah, and when you're the kid doing Quiz Bowl, right, or speech and debate, that's just you'd never imagine that would happen, but it was a big deal. So I love that. I mean, this is actually one of my favorite things to do, and it's something that's funny because I will get stopped every once in a while. I do a lot of media interviews about politics and things like that, but now more often than not, people will stop me at stores and they'll say, "Hey, you're the high Q guy," and I say, "Yeah, I'm the high Q guy," and they just walk off, right? Like that was enough for them to just sort of acknowledge it. But I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool. So this is pretty neat. So I really love doing it. It's been a lot of fun.
So now you become a local celebrity, I see, which is a really, really cool thing to be. Another thing that you do is you are chair of the communications department at UTEP. Explain to us what it means to you to become chair, or to be chair for the students or for the school.
I love what I do, Miguel. I loved teaching. So just as a traditional faculty member, this is my
Right.
second year as chair of the department. There's a lot of things that I think are really significant. I think first, we have an incredibly diverse department in communication at UTEP. When you look around the field of communication, there's not a lot of Mexican Americans that have PhDs, that have tenure, and certainly that have positions like this as department chair. And that's, I love that, and also recognize why that's important, right? Because it's about being able to say to the students, this is about opening your horizons, and being in education is about seeing the world through a different set of lenses. It doesn't mean that the first set of lenses you've got is wrong or that it's inaccurate, but we want you to understand the world. And so being chair, I get to actually steer the ship in a way that's a little bit different when you're a professor, in the
Hmm.
sense of making curriculum changes, things like that. The other
Right.
thing that I've done for about 15 years now is I teach our largest class, the introductory survey for communication. So it's about 200 students every semester.
Hmm.
It is the first time most of the students are entering into the field, and we've got some students that are doing like a gen ed requirement or a minor, or some other major. I love that class, partly because it's kind of like putting on a show for an hour and 20 minutes, right? You've got 200 people, and you've got to find ways to make them feel connected and feel involved, and feel sort of a part of the process. It's also a chance to be able to get the students kind of on the same page, and to get them wired about communication. So my point of pride for a long time, much to the chagrin of folks in other colleges, is I can convert students. So I'll get a student that comes in and says, well, I'm a business major. I'm just taking this as a general ed requirement. And I say, all right, come along, come do I call it the firewalk. Come firewalk with me on this. And by the end of the semester, they're like, I want to change majors. And I was like, yes, you do. And we whisked them, into the major. And because I say, look, if you understand communication, you'll be 1,000 times better at business. If you understand communication, you'll be 1,000 times better at psychology. And I draw from this because I think that our field is not only amazingly creative, but the work that my colleagues do. I mean, I have amazing colleagues, and the work that they're doing allows students to kind of see the world from a different perspective. And so I've got scholars that are looking at film. I've got scholars that are looking at pop music. I've got scholars that are looking at organizations, and that's cool. I mean, I think the one thing that I never thought when I was an undergraduate was, I never thought to myself, man, this is really cool. I liked political science, but in my mind, I was a political science major because that's the only way that you went to law school, which I found
Right.
out much later is not accurate. But I never thought to myself, man, this is cool. When I talk to our students, and when I talk to our colleagues about how we operate, I think, man, this is cool, and it's at the heart of creativity, and this idea of like what communication means. I mean, I think that's the really most important skill. So some of it's applied, right? Can we talk? But then some
Right.
of it is, if I'm watching a television show, what am I really watching in those messages? Or if I see an advertising campaign, what am I really seeing in those ads? And so I love what I do. Being chair is complicated, as you would imagine, because you're essentially you're kind of the weirdest level of mid-management. So you've got dean and a whole bunch of institutional people above you up here, and they're kind of bringing stuff down. You've got all the faculty, and they're coming up, and so sometimes you find yourself a little bit hamstrung. But I am lucky to work with some really amazing colleagues, and that's been it's part of the reason I've stayed at UTEP as long as I have, and part of the reason I was happy to take this particular assignment.
Yeah, one of the things that I find most interesting about UTEP is how much it has grown. I feel like we can visually see it, but I feel like we can also see it within the people that have graduated from the school. What do you think? What do you think the dynamic is that has changed from, let's say, 20 years ago to today, and how are you contributing to that?
Oh, I mean, I can spell this out for you super easily, Miguel. Like, I remember when I was a high school student, and you may have
Right.
had some similar version of this experience, where my guidance counselor and some of my teachers would sort of say the same thing. They would either say some version of, you're too smart for UTEP, or they would talk about their own experiences because they were a product of the university in very negative fashion. So those two things, I think, they have a huge impact on the way that high school students think about the university. And the other thing was that we would see it from the university perspective, that there was a little bit of like city on the hill. You want to come here? Great. You don't want to come here? Oh well, like we're not going to do much to outreach. And what I will say, over the course that I've been at the university, and especially with the last several years of Diana Natalicio and now with Heather Wilson, there is a sense of going to the most competitive students in the El Paso County, in what they call Region 19, and saying, we will give you an education that is on par with those educational opportunities of other places. And I will contend that if you took our top 5% students, that you could pair them against anybody in the country, they would be just as good. They're here for different reasons, and that's the big difference. Sometimes it's a familial thing, right? They don't feel like they can leave. Sometimes it's a little bit of kind of a set of blinders about the ability to go someplace else. I mean, there's these different factors. But the thing that I like to do, and I think the thing that university has done very, very well over the last 10 or 15 years, is recognize that excellence in these students can be paired with excellence in our institution. And I think that you really have found faculty that have committed to not just the university, which I think is true any good institution. You found that are committing to the community. And I think that's the magic. And we forget this sometimes because I think everybody has a relationship with UTEP, usually because of athletics, right? They come to a game, they're on our campus for that reason. But if you think about all the amazing, right, the art galleries we have, the musical performances we have, I mean, those kinds of things are unbelievable because they're a gateway to the world. And I say this to my students all the time, even if you just walk a different way to your car and go through a different building and just kind of peek into what's going on, it's going to blow your mind, right? And I tell people I love going to the engineering building. I don't understand what my colleagues in engineering do for the most part, right? I think they all make lasers. Like every time I go in there, I'm like, oh, this is the building where they make the lasers. Maybe they do. I don't know. But every time I go in there, I think to myself, there's somebody who has dedicated their professional life to this institution to take our students to teach them how to do X kind of engineering. And I think that's what's changed, because I think we've found this kind of synergy. We've done 1,000 times better over the last 10 years with El Paso Community College, right? I mean, for whatever reason, it's taken forever. It's taken forever for people to say like, hey, we should find a better articulation between program A at EPCC and program A at UTEP. And I mean, you've been a part of some of that too. Yes. Why that never happened decades ago, okay, we don't know, but we're getting there. And I think that's a better part of it. And I think what this community has done is recognized, because I do think there's a big part of this is this community as well. We've recognized, especially with first generation students, parents, I think, have recognized that this is a doorway. And you still will hear challenges that a lot of our students have with their parents because they don't quite understand the world, or they don't quite understand the necessity of class, or how they should operate at the university. But all you got to do is look at our first generation numbers, and you see that parents are saying, okay, like, I know this is important. I'm not entirely sure that I can pinpoint why. I'm not sure what your major is or how that's going to work. But I tell my students the same thing. When I was talking to my mom about graduate school, or even thinking about a PhD, or even challenges I would have with stuff, I got a lot of like, well, mijo, just work hard. It'll be okay. And that's great, right? You always want that. But I can't say that, hey mom, like, my advisor is not giving me good advice here, or I don't have a very good explanation of my thesis questions. Just work hard, mijo. I'm like, all right, well, thanks mom, thank you, and off you go. But that takes a lot of effort. So I think we've done a much better job with mentoring. I think we've done a much better job making the university accessible. I mean, I've got colleagues that I'm so incredibly impressed by, because they've taken their thing and they've said, okay, how do I open this up to kids that are probably going to be from El Paso County, and how do I get them excited about this? And that's what you've seen, I think, over the last probably 15 years or so.
And I think that's one of the fantastic aspects of how our city also has grown. I started this show because I really felt like there was a need for individuals, whoever's watching our show, to see other individuals from our community show how important this whole idea of being creative is. Because creativity comes in many aspects, I think. For you, for example, it comes through communications. For somebody else, it might come through engineering. But I believe that all of those come together as one. Is that something that you focus on when you're teaching?
I
The bringing
do.
together all these elements?
I do, and I try to, especially when you've got these classes, like a 200-person class, you're talking
Mhm.
about very different ways of looking at the world, and so you don't want to swing the wheel too far one side or the other, because you need them in those
Right.
original those early classes to kind of feel connected. And there's all kinds of things. One of my favorite things to do, and I think this is rolled off on a lot of my colleagues, is I take a few minutes. I try to get to the class early. I take a few minutes there, maybe a few minutes at the start of class, and I play music every day.
Right.
Usually a playlist of like 2 or 3 songs, and sometimes the songs are connected to whatever the theme is. There'll be like a little inside joke. Sometimes it's tied to an exercise. Sometimes there's a great article my students have read for the last year and a half, about the song "Call Me Maybe," and the article is about how soldiers that are deployed or were deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan were making spoof videos of a spoof video of the Carly Rae Jepsen song. And it's a
Really?
cool article because the students, first, they know the song, right? I mean, most of them they know the song, but this is a really good journal article because she talks about participation, and in this case, why participating in popular culture is about wanting to be part of a creative flow, even if you're deployed, thousands of miles away. And I tell my students,
Right.
this is it, right? Like, it's about recognizing that we have all these similar interests that are created by their very nature, but maybe you don't get to express your creativity in a particular way. So I frame a lot of my teaching that way, and I say some of the stuff that I do is going to seem kind of off the wall, but bear
Right.
with me, because part of it is just finding some common ground. I think that's really hard. I think that you will find that the best teachers have an understanding of the creative, even if, like, the nature of the class doesn't allow you to be creative, because I
Yes.
think part of what you're trying to do is you're looking for different pathways to something else, and
I
I
agree.
I love that, right? I think but I also think it's really, really hard. And so I think the reason I was so excited about your invitation is because I think that idea of even how we talk about creativity sometimes is challenging for people. And there's a lot of people like, well, I just can't do that, or I don't do that. And I say, you don't have to make like a clay pot to be creative, right? You don't have to be an artist in the traditional sense. There's all
Yes,
this other
exactly.
space. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's kind of like the catalyst for the show. I always ask my guests to give the audience a little piece of information that will help them out throughout their lives. What do you think you could tell them? It could be creatively, it could be thought process, whatever you want. Just maybe one phrase or one thought, because we're running out of time here pretty quickly.
Sure. I think everything is an argument, and as soon as you start thinking about the world and your perspective in argumentative form, it'll change
Mhm.
the way that you think, and it'll make you much more effective to engage with other people. Because if you think about your argument meeting up another argument, it'll force you to think about a different perspective, and especially in a polarized time, that's exactly what we need. We need to be able to say, okay, that person's making an argument. They're not attacking me. They're making an argument. Here's my counter argument. That takes a lot of creativity, but I think it's a huge and significant framework that people can use to think about the world.
I really think that that's really good advice for the people. Richard, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out today to talk to us, because it's very important to have people from our community speak to us about different ideas, concepts, and things that they've done. So I hope you enjoyed yourself.
I did. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Awesome. I wanted to thank our audience, our viewing audience, for being here today. And I welcome Richard Pineda to be here with us. And hopefully you guys will return next time. Thank you very much. My name is Miguel Valenzuela, and we are shooting here from our homes because of COVID. Thank you.